Every day, around the world, billions of people open up their devices, their phones, computers, tablets. They use apps, websites, play games, use social media, and send email. At every one of those touchpoints, data is being collected, used, and shared. Big data has been a popular buzzword recently, but when it comes to advertising, what does that actually mean to you, the consumer? Hi, my name is Ben, and I've worked in digital advertising since 2007. You may know me from my other course, Digital Advertising and Marketing 101, where I go into the entire digital advertising ecosystem, all the players, advertisers, publishers, and how they work together. Today, I'm going to walk you through big data. What does big data mean? Why is it a popular term? How are advertisers actually using data to target you every single day? In this course, I'm going to answer the following questions. First, what does big data actually mean? The second is, what kind of laws and regulations exist? The third, what kind of data is actually being collected on you, the user? The fourth is, how is that data actually being collected? And then finally, what companies are involved in the data collection and use? So, let's get started. Let's get started on the Big Data course. To kick things off, I want to talk about laws and regulations and personal identifiable information, or PII. I want to start with this because I find that when I talk to people, this is what they bring up the most. They're worried that advertisers know who they are, where they live, what their phone number is, their mother's maiden name, things of that nature. And understandably, that concerns a lot of people. So, the short answer is, do advertisers know your personal identifiable information, such as your name, address, phone number, etc.? The short answer to that is, unless you have given it to them, no. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, and I'm going to go into the details of that. But in short, well, for some advertisers, that could be important information, not for everyone. If you're a brand such as maybe Pepsi or Coca-Cola, you're targeting tens if not hundreds of millions of people at a time. You don't necessarily need to know every single little bit of personal information about those users. You want to know that they fall into a large, broad category, such as they are a Coke drinker, they are a teenager, they live in a certain area. Things that millions of people or thousands of people could all relate to. I'll get into those categories shortly. But behind this PII, personal identifiable information, there are a few laws and regulations that exist. The first one I'm going to get into is COPPA. COPPA was designed to protect children. So, many people know that you cannot register for a Facebook account unless you are 13. That is a COPPA restriction. COPPA means that you cannot collect data on anyone 13 years or younger. You cannot collect that data, you cannot specifically target them. Even if a 13-year-old tries to give you that information, by law you cannot collect it and you cannot use it. Now obviously you're thinking, well, there are plenty of advertisers out there who want to target children. How do they do that? Again, going back to the high-level category I just mentioned, you want to target high level. If kids are going to a game site that is designed for 6 to 8 or 6 to 9-year-olds, you could advertise around that. You say, I'm going to advertise around this game because I know the kids in my target audience will be playing. That's different than saying, I want to target a 6 to 9-year-old wherever they are on the web. Now, second thing when it comes to age is legal drinking age, or LDA. Now, if you are advertising a beer or a wine or a spirit, you cannot advertise to anyone under the age of 21, obviously, because that is a legal drinking age. So sites that accept that advertising have to be what's called LDA compliant. That means generally that 70 to 71% of their audience is 21 years or older. Now we know that you cannot know for sure exactly how old everyone is, but using a sample size of what you do know, sites can say we know based on our demographic data that we are at least 70% 21-year-olds or higher. If you fall below that, you cannot accept advertising by alcohol clients, and if you get caught, there are major penalties. Now finally, when it comes to legal or restrictions, there are privacy policies. And this is probably one of the more important topics to understand. As I mentioned at the beginning, advertisers do not collect your personal identifiable information unless you give it to them and you give the site you gave it to permission to use it. Now you might say, I've never done that, why would I do that? Well, you probably have. Anytime you sign up for something like Facebook or Twitter or Pandora or any other site where you have to set up an account, you are going to have to accept a terms and conditions, and 99.99% of everybody who clicks them does not read them. But within those terms and conditions, it could say, we are going to take your information and give it to advertisers and let them target you based on the information you give us. If you say you accept that, perfectly legal for them to do that. If they do not put that in their terms and conditions and then they do go out and sell that information, that site can get in a lot of trouble. But that's pretty much it when it comes to laws and policies. If a site says, I'm going to do this, and you say, I give you permission to do it, they can. There aren't that many other regulations, at least in the US, around how that data can be used. So, going back to my last thing about legal drinking age, how does a site necessarily know that they are 70% 21 years or older? Well, you could have a site such as Budweiser, Core, Sam Adams, like some of the sites that we're showing right now, where you go to the site and you actually have to enter your age. And if you enter anything below 21 years, it won't let you in. Now, obviously, if you're 18, you could just lie and it will still work. But as of right now, that is the best policy that we have. Or you could say, I know that 10% of everyone who visits my site has given some kind of personal identifiable information, and of that 10%, I know that 70% or more are 21 years or older. So I can assume, just based on a sample size statistically, that the entire audience that comes to my site is at least 70% 21 years or older. Beyond that, there aren't a whole lot of laws or regulations around what advertisers can and cannot do. Now, I know that is an oversimplification, but these are the important things that you, the consumer, are probably aware of or want to be aware of on your day-to-day use of the internet. Now we're going to move on to data categories. Now, there are 5 categories that we're going to discuss in this course: demographic, behavioral, contextual, retargeting, and location. These are the 5 most common types of data categories that advertisers use to target their ads to the right consumer. Now we're going to start with demographic data. This is characteristics such as population size, age, gender, income, and everything within the population. This is a very broad category. So for example, if you are selling baseball bats, you want to target sports fans who live in an area where they can use baseball bats. If you are selling baseball bats in December, you don't want to target Maine because people aren't outside playing baseball in Maine in December, but they are in Florida. So a demographic could be people who live in the South, who are of a certain age, and who enjoy sports as a lifestyle. Pretty broad category, but then you can start to narrow it down using layering in some of these other categories, such as behavioral data. Now this is the data that is collected about an individual, and this is done using cookies or device ID. So if you've ever heard somebody say maybe you should clear your cookies, essentially what that is your internet browser, be it Chrome, Internet Explorer, Mozilla, Opera, Safari, whatever your browser of choice is, they collect all sorts of information about every site that you go to. If you go to ESPN.com, it'll say that's a sports site. If you go to a site on yoga, say that's a yoga site. If you go to a site such as a mommy blog, that's a lifestyle brand and a mom blog. Then that kind of data can be used by advertisers to target their ad. If you go to a site, ESPN.com for example, in that last example we're saying they're selling baseball bats. You go to ESPN.com and this company selling baseball bats sees your computer, and based on their cookie data, they say, okay, that user has gone to other sports sites. They probably have a affinity for sports or baseball, and I think they're located in Florida. I'm going to serve them an ad. They might say, okay, we checked everything off, but they're located in Maine, not the right time, not going to serve them an ad. I'll pass and let somebody else bid and try to win that ad. Now, the next category is contextual data. So again, we're layering in, we're getting a little bit deeper into this one. So contextual is the actual content of the website that you are visiting. So again, how does that cookie know that ESPN is a sports site? Well, they can read the site and they say, this is sports content. Contextually, this is sports content. So let's say you're a baseball company selling baseball bats in summer. You could target anyone in the country because in the summer, everyone can play baseball. So you could say, we don't care where you are, we just want to target people on sports sites. Be that ESPN, be that Sports Illustrated, Sporting News, whatever you have. They say, as long as it is a sports site, I want to serve an ad there. Next is retargeting. So let's say you go to mybigbaseballbatstore.com and you look around, but you don't actually buy anything. That site could drop a cookie on your computer and then find you later. So later on, you're browsing the web and all of a sudden you see an ad for a baseball bat for that website. A lot of people have seen these. Probably Amazon is one of the biggest contributors of this. You view an item on Amazon, and then later on a totally different website, you get an ad for Amazon for that exact product that you just viewed. That's because Amazon is dropping a cookie on your computer, and they are following you and trying to get you to come back and convert. That is a very efficient way of targeting people. So you'll see a lot of advertisers who use that. There is normally a time window. They're only going to retarget you for a certain amount of days, sometimes even hours. And ideally, it would be if you actually do convert, if you do buy that product, you no longer will get those retargeting ads. As we all know, that is not always the case. That is very inefficient for Amazon to target everybody, even if they've already purchased, but it's not a perfect system. But if you ever see an ad after you already viewed something and you feel like maybe you're being followed, you are. And it's called retargeting, and it's done through dropping a cookie on your computer, identifying you as somebody who has viewed that content, and now you're trying to get them to come back and actually convert. Finally, under data collection is location. Now this has gotten bigger and bigger with mobile devices, but again, to my earlier point, if you are selling baseball bats in winter, you do not want to target people in Maine, but you would want to target people in Florida. So you want to make sure that you're targeting people by the right location. There are a number of different ways that you can actually get that information. If you're on a mobile phone, you could use GPS or lat-long data. Now I'm sure many people have opened up an app and gotten a screen that says, do you give them permission to access your location? Now if you're using Google Maps or Uber, you might say, yeah, sure, no problem. You have to have my location for me to get my Uber or for me to pull up a map. But you might open up an app that's like a calculator app, and it says, can we have your location? You go, why the heck does a calculator app need my location? It's for this, so that they can pass that information on to their advertisers, and their advertisers can serve you an ad where you're using that calculator app or that game or whatever app that you're using that otherwise would have no reason to collect your location. And a lot of these companies and these apps will collect your location even when you're not using them. Google Maps, Uber, a number of other ones will continue to use that, and they can sell that data to third parties, and I'll get into that in just a minute. Finally, if you're on a desktop, there's your IP address, your Internet Protocol address. Now, in the early days of the Internet, this was not very accurate. For example, AOL was headquartered in Atlanta, and everyone who was using AOL was routed through servers in Atlanta, and it looked like everyone anywhere in the country was based physically in Atlanta. That is no longer the case, thankfully. So if you are on a computer, it knows you are generally in this area. Depending on how many different servers you have in your particular area, it'll give you an idea of how accurate it is. For example, if you're in New York City, there's a lot of people here, which means there have to be a lot of routers to route data in and out. So if you're on a computer in the middle of New York City, it's going to know probably within a matter of blocks where you are. However, if you're in a more rural location, in the suburbs, it might say, okay, we think they're in this zip code, but we don't know exactly down to the street address. Again, to the point of the baseball bat conversation, that could be enough. You could say, I want to target people who are in this state, and IP address is great for that. Now, if you're somebody like a Starbucks and you want to target down to, I need people within 2 blocks of my Starbucks, then you want a mobile device with GPS or lat-long data. Alright, now that we've discussed data categories, let's talk about how that data is actually collected. The first is an ad is served on your device. So I mentioned that your device is collecting cookies all the time unless you go and erase them. So how does that cookie actually get to the advertiser? Well, if an ad is displayed on your computer, there's the actual ad that you see, and behind that is a bunch of code. And in that code are things called macros. And macros are another piece of code that say, hey, look on this computer and try to see if you can find any of these cookies. Do you see a cookie that says sports? Do you see one that has any indication of how old they are, what kind of gender they are, where they live, what kind of income they might have? And if your computer has that kind of cookie, has that information those macros are looking for, it can pull them in, and it can decide whether or not to even serve an ad. Now that transaction takes place in milliseconds. We're talking fractions of a fraction of a second. And it can be happening across multiple advertisers all at one time. So there might be 5 or 6 advertisers who may be interested in that particular ad unit on your computer. But the one that's going to win is the one that says, yes, I can get that information, it's what I want, and I'm willing to pay a premium for it. There may be advertisers say, I'm looking for 5 categories, you have only checked off 2 of them, I'm going to pass. I'm not really that interested in this. Unless nobody else is interested, then maybe I'll give you a little bit. So anytime an ad is actually served on your device, it is looking for data about you. The second way is a third party. So I mentioned before that some apps have things like location data running at all times in the background. They could be, not always, and I don't know the ins and outs of every single app, but they could be collecting that data and selling it to a third party. Blue Kite, Xlate, Axiom are 3 large data companies. What they do is essentially make a database of every device they come across, be that a laptop computer, a tablet, a mobile phone, even a smart TV in some situations. And they say, okay, we've seen this device on multiple apps, multiple websites, whatever it might be, and we're starting to build out a profile. We saw this device use Uber, okay? We have a location for this app. We saw this mobile device also use a sports app, and they also played a game, and they also have a mommy blogger app. And they can say, okay, this is probably a mom maybe with kids who are into sports and they live in a certain area. The more information you have, the better profile you can get. Again, it's not PII. They don't know it's Jane Doe and they live at 14 Evergreen Terrace. It's a general picture of this is the type of person that is using that device. Then advertisers can go to these companies and say, I want to target moms with kids who play sports. And Blue Kite will say, you came to the right place because we have a preset list of 2 million devices that fit that category. Now you can go out and target just those 2 million devices. Now that's obviously premium, and depending on how specific your target audience actually is, you may have to pay a pretty penny if you're an advertiser to get that data. But that also means no waste, because you're only getting exactly your target, as opposed to like TV, where you might only be reaching 1 of 5 people in the room who are actually your target audience. The third way is CRM data, customer relationship management. So this is if you've ever signed up for a website. If you sign up for the newsletter, then they can retarget you. They might say, we have 10,000 people who have signed up on our newsletter, and we have their email addresses, and we're going to target just those people. This one's pretty simple. I'm sure everyone's inundated with emails that you signed up for, and maybe you clicked the box and you said, yes, I accept it, you can spam me, and they do. It's annoying and you have to go and unsubscribe. But this is CRM data at its most basic level. You can get even more and more complicated, where you work with a third party, you work with something that's called a DMP, which I'll get into shortly, and you build out an even larger profile. But the most basic form of CRM data, think about your email list that you sign up for. It's a list that says, this is my individual list as a company. I didn't buy it from anywhere else. It's first-party data on clients, customers that I know exist, I know have come to me before. And then finally, account data. Twitter, Facebook, Pandora, 3 really great examples of account data. And by account data, I mean you as a user has given up your information. You went to Facebook and you said, I'm Jane Doe. I live here. I like music. I like movies. I like sports. I like food. That is amazing for an advertiser, and that's why Facebook is making so much money, because they have all that information. An advertiser can say, okay, I want to go and target people who live in this area and they're interested in music and they're interested in food and they're interested in whatever, and it might come down to a target of only a couple thousand people, and I'm only going to serve ads to those few thousand people who meet my audience needs. And again, it could be a few million people. But the point is, Facebook has so much information that advertisers can really dig deep and target only the type of user that they want, which again eliminates waste. Now, a couple interesting sidebars. One, Twitter does not collect as much data as Facebook, not nearly as much data as Facebook, and their advertising product has been really shitty, for lack of better terms. And that is why they are struggling so much. And it is kind of frustrating for an advertiser to see how well Facebook has built out their advertising product and how far behind Twitter is. Because as an advertiser, you know people are on Twitter, people are using it, you would like to target them there, but you don't have as much control or as many options as you do on something like Facebook. So they are falling behind on that race. If they step it up, we'll see. Pandora, on the other hand, is interesting because you give them your location data, which means you usually will get an ad based on where you signed up. But let's say, for example, I signed up when I was in college. So I live in New York City now, but I went to college in Charleston, South Carolina. If I'm listening to Pandora, I used to get ads for Charleston, even though I was based in New York City, because it was going off of what data I used when I signed up. It wasn't until I went and updated my data to say I now live in New York that I started getting ads for New York City. Now, that's not very efficient because the advertiser could use my IP address or my GPS information on my phone to know that I'm actually not in South Carolina anymore, I'm in New York, and they should give me the appropriate ad, but Pandora wasn't set up that way. I think they're changing it, they should be changing it, but at least in the past couple of years, that has been the case. Okay, now we're going to talk about a lot of the ad tech companies. Now, some of them we've already talked about, and some of them you may already know, but most of them you probably don't know. So right now you see Google on this screen. Obviously people are familiar with Google. They're a huge player, and they make nearly $80 billion a year in advertising dollars. A lot of those are search dollars that you see on the side of the screen when you do a Google search. A lot of that money comes from display and video and from other companies that they own. Other companies on here, we see Liquid, MediaMath, Flurry, XAD. Just an example of some of the other players in the space that handle things like data, analytics, they are ad networks, they are ad servers. And there's a whole host of companies. And we already talked a little bit about tech companies on how data was collected when we talked about BlueKai and Xlade and the such. These are the companies that are responsible for actually getting the ad to the consumer and then tracking it. So behind the ad tech companies, we have first advertising demand sources. Now these are companies that are made up of networks or DSPs for the most part, and they have relationships with advertisers or agencies, and an advertiser will say we need to spend a certain amount of money on mobile or on video, on desktop, or any other digital platform you can think of, and they go to these partners that have that type of inventory. So let's say XAD works with Starbucks, and Starbucks says we want to target people who are within 4 blocks of a Starbucks on their mobile phone. They would deal with XAD, and XAD would go out, find those consumers, and serve them an ad. Same type of setup for anything you can think of with TAPAD, PubMatic, MediaMath, OpenX, just to name a few. Now, those advertising demand sources and the advertiser themselves have to work with something else, something that's called an ad server. So an ad server is the technology or the platform that actually manages serving that ad on the platform. So if Starbucks works with XAD, they have to take the creative, whatever image or ad is going to be displayed on the device, upload it to an ad server, and then that ad server is what actually renders that ad on the device. Everything is done with code, obviously. There's some piece of code behind that ad call. So if you're on your device and you're within 4 blocks of a Starbucks, a piece of code says, hey, this device is near a Starbucks. It meets the parameters for this campaign. Let me ping our ad server and tell it to render the ad that has been uploaded for this particular campaign. And there are a number of different ad servers that provide different services. Some are mobile specific, others like Liquid is a video ad server. DoubleClick for publishers is an ad server that is owned by Google. Google owns DoubleClick. They have DoubleClick for publishers and for advertisers, basically opposite sides of the same platform. MoPub and Smoto are mobile specific ad servers and have the technology to run specifically within app as well as on mobile web. And again, these are just a handful of many players out in the space. We're talking about hundreds of different potential ad servers, networks, demand partners, and different combinations of them working together. On top of that, we also have analytics and data. So we've been talking about data and how it gets to you, how it's tracked, how it's managed, but obviously you've got to be able to compile all of that in a way that makes it all useful. Now, these are just a couple of pretty common and free analytic platforms. There are a lot more, much more complicated platforms, a lot of custom platforms. So when I talked about the ad server and the ad networks and DSPs, they will all have their own sort of back-end reporting program that they use, their own sort of analytics program, and the differences between them are really what makes them stand apart and why an advertiser might want to work with one versus the other. But if you are developing an app or you've built a website and you want to get data about what is happening within your environment, you can use a number of these. Flurry is great for mobile apps. It's owned by Yahoo. Anyone can download it, put it into your app. It'll tell you things like usage, how many unique devices, how much time is spent on the app, things of that nature. Google Analytics is the same thing. It's also good for your standard desktop website and your mobile website. It gives you everything like where the people came from, how much time on site, how many pages did they visit while they were on the site, what is their demo, what are their interests. You can put in sorts of events and track how many people click on a certain link or go to a certain site or download something, anything you can think of. And again, this is a free Google product. They have paid versions as well, but if anyone with a website or an app can sign up for Google Analytics and start using that. And then Crashlytics is for apps. So if you've ever used an app on your phone and it crashed, that's a problem. That's a bug that app developer wants to fix. Crashlytics will track that kind of thing, report it back to the app developer, and allow them to fix that bug. So a lot of large apps will have this or a similar program installed within their app to track that kind of thing. Now, lastly, we talk about DMPs, Data Management Platform. So, briefly talked about this earlier on in the course, but essentially what a DMP is a collection of data with a specific purpose in mind. So, well, everything we've talked about up until this point, except for maybe the CRM data where the DMP came into play before, is how do you collect and manage data for everything, every device in the world, every device you come in contact with, every device or every user within a particular target audience. The DMP is designed usually at the advertiser level or at the campaign level. So, for example, if you are an ad network or a DSP that we talked about before, you might have multiple DMPs for each one of your clients. So let's say Coke is working with XAD. XAD will have a DMP for Coke, and they'll have a different DMP for a different client, another one for another client, and so on and so forth. The advantage here is that if you're an advertiser, you can have your own set of information about every consumer that you have served an ad to in the past, and you can start to build out a database on them, and you can grow it over time. Instead of just going to a data partner and saying, I want to buy a large audience segment that will meet my target audience needs, you now say, I have my own first-party data of people that I have served an ad to, and based on that data, based on how they reacted, where they are, and what I know about them, I can tailor my future ads to them. So, for example, you could serve them an ad, awareness ad, Coke. Coke is great. And now they're in your DMP because they were served an ad and that was tracked. If they didn't click on it, you could then serve them a follow-up ad later on saying, click here to download a coupon, because you know that they were exposed but they didn't do anything, so now you need to give them a different message to try to get them to engage or take some sort of an action. And then based on how they react to that ad, you can serve them another, and so on and so forth. Think of it kind of like the old Mad Libs. You kind of make your own story, and based on what happens in one fill in the blank, it might change the path or what page you jump to or things and so forth. But all of these companies that we talked about can benefit from having a DMP, or an advertiser can have one DMP that multiple ad networks, ad servers, or data companies can access and work with. So that brings up probably what concerns a lot of people when it comes to data in general, and how are advertisers collecting this kind of stuff, and are they using it for nefarious purposes, essentially. Now, I am a little biased because I am in the industry, but from my standpoint, this is great, because as long as you use the internet, you're going to find that you run into ads. Unless you pay for everything that you go to, unless you only go to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and you have a paid subscription to them, you're going to run into ads, because that's how these publishers can pay to provide their content and afford to provide that content to you. So if you're going to see an ad, wouldn't you prefer that that ad is tailored to you as opposed to completely random? I think the answer is yes, and I think that as we move along and this industry grows, and to be honest, digital advertising is still a very young industry, especially compared to things like TV and print and radio. We're learning, ads are getting better, they're getting smarter, they're getting less intrusive, they're being more user-friendly, they're less disruptive in your environment. So ideally, over time, you should see less ads, and the ones that you do see will be more relevant to you, they won't be as intrusive, and they won't be as annoying as they have been in the past. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this course. I know it was kind of a quick overview. Try to keep it into 30 minutes to give everyone an easy overview and rundown of the big data ecosystem and what advertisers actually do with it. If you want to learn more about digital advertising in general, I highly recommend my other course, Digital Advertising and Marketing 101. I go into a lot more detail about these tech companies, how they work together, about how ads are bought, pricing models, how an agency works, things of that kind of nature. It's a much longer course, but it goes into a lot more detail. There will be links provided for you. As well as, I encourage everybody to reach out to me if you have any questions. Reach out to me on this platform. You can also reach me on Twitter. My handle is @BenS_official. Happy to answer questions. Happy to provide more detail where I can. And that is it. So thank you. Hope you enjoyed. Before I go, I want to take a quick moment to call out two sites that I use in the production of this course. The first is bensound.com. They have a great selection of royalty-free music. The second site is pexels.com. Again, royalty-free site filled with stock images and stock videos. Thank you to both of you for helping me make this possible.